Hello everybody, welcome. Thanks for coming out this evening. I'm Lori Young, I'm the director of the Wilderness Institute. This is the Wilderness Lecture Series, sponsored this year by the Wilderness Institute and the Center for Ethics here at the University of Montana. We're very fortunate tonight to have Eban Goodstein with us from Portland, Oregon, and we'll be introducing him in just a moment. But first, a few announcements. First, I want to remind you that we have one more lecture left in this series. Next week, on Tuesday night, Casey Golden, the policy director from Climate Solutions, will be joining us for our final lecture. And Climate Solutions is a nonprofit organization that is really at the leading edge of developing sustainable communities and sustainable businesses in response to global warming. And Casey is the kind of person that can really envision a different kind of future and get other folks, work with other people to actually implement that future. And so next week he'll be talking about really tangible, practical solutions that are both inspiring and real, implementable, and being put into action right now. And so please join us next week. I'd like to take a moment to once again thank the Dana Gallery for generously donating images for this series posters. And in particular, I'd like to thank Neil Patterson, who allowed us to use his painting Banded Peak for the big series poster. I'd like to ask everybody to stay until 8:30. Our speaker tonight will talk until about 8 o'clock, after which we'll have questions and answers. And as I mentioned last week, the questions and answers are just as lively as the lecture itself. And so please stick with us the whole time. As I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, tonight's lecture is actually co-sponsored by the Environmental Studies program here at the University of Montana. And tonight, Robin Saha, Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies, will be introducing our speaker. So welcome, Robin.
Thank you, Lori. This lecture series, Responding to Climate Change, Moving from Science to Solutions, has moved into the solutions realm. In the last week, we had a speaker to talk about the role of faith and faith-based communities in climate change solutions. And this week, we're very fortunate to have Eban Goodstein, who's a professor of economics at the Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, to talk about climate change solutions that involve economics, policy, and passion, which I think you'll find out tonight and agree that it's a formidable combination to bring together. Eban's the author of Fighting for Love in the Century of Extinction, How Passion and Politics Can Stop Global Warming. Much of his work is dedicated to engaging young people in the burgeoning climate change movement. And I think tonight's will convince you that young people are already really engaged on the front lines of this growing movement and already making a difference. Professor Goodstein's work as director of Focus the Nation is really an example of facilitating involvement of young people in leading a national educational initiative. He's been involving campuses around the country in events that bring us together around common concerns and common solutions. On January 31st of this year, under Professor Goodstein's leadership, thousands of college campuses came together with educational programs related to climate change. And I'm proud to say that University of Montana was one of them. We had a very robust set of Focus the Nation events. Over 35 faculty were involved from all sorts of departments, from modern and classical languages to chemistry to geography to pharmacy, in bringing climate change into their classroom, involving lessons, involving students. This is classes from anywhere from 7 to 500 students. And we also had a video message from U.S. Senator Baucus, Our Nobel laureate, Professor Steve Running, also introduced a 2% solution webcast. And we had a panel also called 30 Climate Change Policy and Solutions, U.S., Montana, Missoula, and UM. And for that panel, some of you were there, I'm sure a lot of you were there. We had Governor Schweitzer introduce the panel, which included the director of the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, Richard Opper, the mayor of Missoula, John Engen, and UM professor and co-chair of the Sustainable Campus Committee, Phil Condon, and UM climate science scientist Ann Klein. Over 350 people were in the audience, and there was a chance to interact and ask questions. EVST professor Len Broberg and the ASUM sustainability coordinator Jesse Davey helped coordinate that. Is Jesse here tonight? Can you stand up and wave? She can wave. Let's give her a hand for our part in Focus the Nation. Of course, addressing climate change will require sustained effort, and few people are as dedicated to that as Eban Goodstein. After tonight, perhaps you too will be one of those people, if you aren't already. Tonight, Professor Goodstein's lecture is titled The Greatest Generation, How Today's 20-Year-Olds Will Save the Planet. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here tonight, and I want to thank everybody who made this possible, and especially thank Jessie again for her leadership in Focus the Nation. I'm going to talk a little bit about that initiative tonight, but first I just want to digress a little bit and say that it's good to be back in Montana. I was here, this book I wrote, Fighting for Love in the Century of Extinction, grew out of my own love for wilderness and of the natural world, and it was an effort to kind of come to grips with what global warming is going to mean for many of the places in this world that I love. And in 1980, when I was a college sophomore, I had the wonderful, actually I owe it to the Wilderness Act, because when Congress designated the wilderness areas, they required that the U.S. Geological Survey do mineral evaluations of the wilderness areas to make sure that there was no big deposits locked up in them. And so as a result, I got hired by the U.S. Geological Survey because I was a geology major as an undergrad, and I spent a glorious summer in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness on Lost Horse Creek, just west of Hamilton, pretty much running up and down all those drainages, and it was a very formative experience for me. So I saw y'all were advertising the wilderness program here, and I would urge you to take advantage of that. It will be a spiritual experience in addition to an educational one, I think, if you get engaged. So it's nice to be back, and what I want to do tonight is talk about the Focus the Nation project, and Jesse has a sign-up sheet that's going to circulate if you're interested in getting on our e-bulletin to learn more about the project. We won't overwhelm you with emails, but it's a good way to stay in touch as you learn about it. To get started, I'm just going to show you a real quick video that kind of captures what we did this year. So enjoy.
January 31st, 2008, America's students launched Focus the Nation, a day to educate students, legislators, and communities about climate change.
As young people, we know that climate change is the challenge of our generation, so we ask you to take our call to action sincerely.
This initiative, Focus the Nation, brings our campus together with over 1,000 high schools, colleges, and universities across the country.
Key features of Focus the Nation is civic engagement. From campus to Congress, Focus the Nation is directly engaging with millions of students
and citizens in the nation's decision making.
I want to congratulate you on Focus the Nation. Have young people have this focus on this subject that is so far-reaching gives me great hope.
There is an organization called Focus the Nation, which is going to have the largest campus teach-in on global warming in United States history right here on the Clemson campus. And I want this is an important issue. I want everybody to be involved with it, everybody to be paying attention. I hope all of you choose to participate because that's a terrific issue, and I wanted to acknowledge that.
Focus the Nation has brought together the
hope of a new politics leading our country in a new direction. Each and every one of you should be commended.
Hello, this is Senator Barbara Boxer, and I'm so pleased to send a greeting to everyone participating in the Focus the Nation events.
I know other governors feel as I do, and understand that tomorrow, thousands of campuses across the country, including 60 in Florida alone, you will dedicate the day to discussing climate change.
We can get to the cap and trade without hurting our economy, and we have to be moving forward in those kinds of discussions.
Because today is all about leadership, and it's about us coming together, it's about all different schools around Georgia, around Atlanta, just really taking a stand and talking to our legislature and letting them know these issues are serious, climate change is serious.
But what's a nice Republican congressman doing in a place like this? You know, this seems to be a place for Al Gore, right? Global warming and all of that. Well, I'm here to say three things. First of all, it's a place for all of us. Second of all, it's true to conservative principles because we believe in markets. And third, it's a wonderful opportunity.
As a staunch advocate for environmental justice, I understand the need for leaders of all walks of life to bring their own views and backgrounds to bear on this global issue.
I want to add my thanks to all of the students and faculty on this campus who were involved in setting this up. This is really a historic event, and the fact that there are 43 of these events just across the state of Colorado, 1,700 of them nationwide, I think demonstrates how far the country's come in recognizing what an extraordinary challenge and really at the same time an opportunity global warming presents for us.
Hello, University of Portland.
We are in a race with this greenhouse gas effect. It's going to require us to reduce greenhouse gases 80% by 2050.
I'm excited to see this day come and to know that what the leadership on Cal Poly's campus is going to be replicated across this nation. And we've seen now, we've got some political things going on in this country. Students and young people are really making a difference. And here is the occasion when it's going to happen again.
Climate change is happening, and we need to act very aggressively.
It's been very frustrating to be a member of this Congress here and not be able to have a Congress which is able to muster a sufficient number of votes to pass more progressive energy initiatives, including the ones that you raised.
Will help us spur our economy. There are tremendous opportunities for alternative fuels, for wind and solar, and I think that the reason that we have not really seriously dealt with the economic opportunities for investors, for people who are looking for a career, is because we have taken the availability of fossil fuels for granted. And now that the science and the politics have told us that we can no longer do this, I think it's going to open the door for a whole new industry in addition to saving the planet.
I think the legislators were surprised with how many students actually showed up. And I think they also like to cheer.
It's hot in here. There's too much carbon in the atmosphere.
We are coming together to do something truly remarkable.
And it's through people like yourself that this message will be carried out. Great movements do not start in Washington or in Hartford. They start principally in your hearts and in your minds. And they become a cause when you're able to articulate them in a manner that brings people together, as this cause about the environment can do better than most.
We need you to hear what other people are thinking.
Oops, that doesn't look good. Okay. Okay, I want to talk with y'all about the Focus Nation project and what happened this year and what can happen next year. But I want to talk about the context first. And I know you all have been in a series now where you've heard a lot of different perspectives on global warming. And so I think you'll understand what I mean when I say that we are truly standing at a unique moment in human history, in the sense that the decisions that we're going to make over the next couple of years to stabilize and begin to cut global warming pollution, and also to invest tens of billions of dollars a year in the clean energy technologies that you guys are going to need, those decisions are going to have profound impacts, not only on our own lives and the lives of our children, but in fact for every human being who will ever walk the face of the planet from now until the end of time. Unchecked global warming will kill more people and drive more animals, plants, insects, creatures into extinction than has any industrial pollutant in human history. And yet, taking the first steps to stop global warming, and that involves stabilizing emissions in the next few years and beginning to cut, and also investing the kind of money that you're going to need in clean energy technologies. The obstacles to taking those steps are not economic, they're not technical, they reflect instead a lack of political will. And underlying that lack of political will is a lack of awareness about the depth of the civilizational challenge that we are facing. Although that is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and young people are really at the forefront of making that kind of shift. And the window for action is very short. It's very short. It's really hard to believe when you look out there on a normal day that we truly are standing at the unique moment in world history. Because the scientists have told us that the world is going to heat up somewhere between 3 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 100 years. And to put those numbers in perspective, during the last ice age, a period of time during which this part of the world was covered by hundreds of meters of ice, the world was only 9 degrees Fahrenheit colder than it is right now. So we are talking about the very real possibility of a swing in global temperatures of ice age magnitude within your lifetimes, only in the opposite direction. And we're getting a little feedback here, so you got it? Okay. Can y'all still hear me in the back okay? Yeah. So that is what is very, very possible in your lifetimes. And so the challenge that we face as Americans is to hold global warming to that low end, to the 3 or 4 degree Fahrenheit window. Because if we do that, then you will still be living in a recognizable world. It will be in many ways a challenging world and a different world, but it will still be recognizable. If we let it slide beyond that and we move into 5 or 6 or 8 or 9 degrees Fahrenheit, then we're talking really about a whole new planet and a world that will be very, very difficult for your children to build a kind of safe and sustainable lifestyle that we all hope that they will be able to build. Those are the stakes. That's what is in the balance in the next few years. And we need to do this as Americans, because as Americans we're only 4% of the world's population, but we emit about 22% of the world's global warming pollution. But more significantly, as Americans, if we put our mind to it, we have the wealth and the power and the technology and the research institutions to invest in the kind of solutions that can really stabilize the climate and create a much more prosperous and safe world. Now, a lot of people refer to my parents' generation as the greatest generation because they fought and won World War II and grew up in the Great Depression. But in fact, it really is the young people in this room. You 20, how many of you guys are 20 or 25 or under 25? Okay, it's really you I'm talking to tonight. Because by the time you reach my age, I'm almost 50, it'll be around the year 2040. By that time, you will have brought an end to the fossil fuel era. You will have rewired every city on Earth with clean energy technologies. You will have reinvented transportation. You will have redesigned cities. You will have reimagined the global food system. And in doing all that, you will become the greatest generation. In doing all that, you will create tens of millions of jobs. You will lift billions of people out of poverty, and you will stabilize the global climate. So you ready? You gonna do that? All right, that's good. Okay. Okay. Now, you didn't ask for that, right? You didn't, this wasn't your choice. But this really is the mission of your generation. And with this mission, you really cannot afford to fail. So that's where we're headed. That's kind of the stakes. And I mean, you guys know this story, and I don't need to tell it to you. The challenge here is this carbon blanket that's surrounding the atmosphere, heat-trapping gases. Started out, the thickness of that carbon blanket started out at 280 parts per million pre-industrial. It's now 385. It's rising every year. And the question that again, we have to answer is how high is that number going to go? Because we are engaged in an unprecedented natural experiment in which we are altering the very nature of the Earth's climate control system. And it really is up to us, the people sitting in this room, to decide how far that experiment's going to go. It really is our responsibility. And as you know, that the scientific community has turned itself inside out over the last 20 years, engaging in a massive, unprecedented global research project, looking desperately for some other explanation to account for the rapid warming of the Earth that we've observed for the last 30 years. And they simply, in the last 100 years in fact, and they simply can't find it. And this simple carbon blanket story explains the data with frightening elegance. I want to show you one more slide that you've probably seen, but it's one that really has had a formative impact on my thinking. And what this shows is the Earth's climate going back 400,000 years, and it shows the Earth sliding into and out of ice ages. It's about a 100,000-year cycle. This is the thickness of that carbon blanket in the atmosphere. And this is the last 10,000 years. It's the Holocene. It's the period of time during which human civilization developed. And what you can see is that humans have been the beneficiary not only of a remarkably warm period in climate history, but also a remarkably stable period. This is an unusual period. The climate is in fact typically subject to wide swings in temperature in relatively short periods of time, suggesting that there are powerful positive feedback loops built into the system, that it's inherently unstable, not stable. So this is animal husbandry, this is the building of cities, and right there is the iPod. You can see that during the last ice age, the average temperature was about 4.5 degrees C colder than it is right now, about 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And just to give you a sense of how far outside the realm of natural variation we are headed, at the low end, the planet's going to heat up about this much within your lifetimes. That's built into the pipeline. It's guaranteed. And at the high end, we're talking about a range comparable to a swing in ice age magnitude, only in the opposite direction, happening within your lifetime. So this is not about natural variability. We are way outside the realm of that. The top graph here shows the thickness of that carbon blanket that's trapping the heat. And what you can see, is that for the last 400,000 years, and now probably going back 20 million years, we know that the thickness of that blanket has never been above 290 or 300 parts per million until now. And it doesn't show it on the graph, but we're right here at 385 parts per million. And again, the question is, how high are we going to go this century? Because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that there's a pretty strong correlation here between the thickness of that carbon blanket and planetary temperatures. The peaks and valleys line up. Now that's not a causal relationship, it's a correlation, it's not a causal relationship. But in fact what we know is that there's a positive feedback loop present. So in the past, as the planet started to warm up, that's led to more CO2 in the atmosphere, thicker blanket, warmer planet, more CO2 in the atmosphere, thicker blanket, warmer planet. And that's the kind of positive feedback loops that drive these rapid and large swings in global temperature. But what we're doing now is, driving the system, right? We've pushed CO2 levels way out of the range of anywhere they've been for the last 500,000 years, and we're basically just begging for temperatures to follow. Now, I'm going to talk only briefly about impacts. We've had a degree warming over the last century. We're now facing the probability of an ice-free Arctic within a decade or two. That, of course, means likely extinction for many Arctic polar bear populations, as well as the creatures and the cultures that inhabit the Arctic Circle. Spring is coming 2 weeks earlier in the temperate parts of the world. And of course, the most visible impacts of global warming are the disappearance of temperate glaciers. This is Austria, that's Alaska. You've got it here in Glacier National Park. And this is my hometown of Portland, Oregon. Okay? This is Mount Hood. It's also your hometown. It's really all of our backyards in the western United States. This is Mount Hood with a normal snowpack. That's Mount Hood with a 50% snowpack. I understand you had Professor Dr. Fager here talking about the loss of snowpack, impacts on water supplies. I don't need to sort of belabor that point, except to say that by the end of the century, there will be no snow on Mount Hood in the summertime. That's our summer water supply. What global warming means for my kids is condemning them to year after year after year of what we consider now to be summer drought conditions. We had that year in 2001. It was a 50% snowpack year. This is the kind of headlines that we saw in Oregon. I mean, Oregon is a water-rich state. We are not used to this kind of headlines, but that is the future that global warming is dialing up. Now, here in Montana, in Oregon, throughout the United States, we are a rich country. And you guys will figure out how to adapt to 3 or 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit warming. You don't have any choice. You have to. And in Oregon and in the western United States, we will figure out how to get by on less water. We will perhaps build more dams, or we will store rainfall in underground aquifers, or we will get a lot more efficient. A lot of farmers will go bankrupt because of agricultural patterns are going to shift. And of course, the quality of life is going to drop in a lot of regions, because what's special about Oregon anyway is all that summer water. But this is going to be your world. You guys will figure out how to get through it. As you move further down the mountains of the Western Americas, though, the story becomes much grimmer. So this is the Rimac River in Lima, Peru. It's a primary drinking water supply for a city of 6 million people. And it could very well be running dry 6 months of the year in a couple of decades, because it's fed by rapidly shrinking glaciers and snowpack in the Andes. And it's very hard to imagine what a city of 6 million people are going to do when their water supply dries up in a country as poor as Peru. And this is the standard story about global warming, is that it's going to be, and in fact already is, poor people in developing countries who will bear the first and hardest brunt of the impacts of climate change. And you don't have to go to a developing country to see that. We learned that the hard way here in America with Katrina just a couple of years ago. You can't blame any individual extreme weather event on global warming, just like you can't blame any individual lung cancer on cigarette smoking. But certainly Hurricane Katrina, and just last year we had 2 Category 5 hurricanes slam into Latin America, first time ever. Those events are consistent with what the scientists are telling us is going to happen as we heat up sea surface temperatures and add fuel to the fire that's driving the intensity of those storms. Now, I don't need to go through this litany either. You've been studying it, hearing about it. One of the issues that is dear to my heart is extinction. The possibility that global warming could trigger a mass extinction on this planet as habitat is destroyed across the globe. There was a study in Nature a few years ago that suggested that by the year 2050, roughly when you guys are 50 or 60 years old, roughly 1/3 of the as many as 1/3 of the creatures, terrestrial creatures on the planet, that's 1 out of 3 animals, insects, birds, could be locked onto an extinction path solely as a function of habitat destruction from global warming. At the high end, extinction estimates run as high as 50%. So it's important, though, again, to say, well, this is your future. I mean, how bad is it going to get? I mean, all this stuff gets worse as it warms more. You guys will be able to manage, and you will manage through 3 or 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit warming. As we push into 6 and 7 and 8, it becomes much more of a challenge for you guys, and even more of a challenge for your children. There's some good stuff that comes with global warming, and you guys need to take advantage of every bit of that. Longer growing seasons will be good and have been good for agriculture, provided you're not facing pest and disease problems or water shortages. Fewer cold-related deaths, more good golf days. Let's have that up there. That's sort of a joke, but people do tend to move from, northern Montana to Arizona and not the reverse. To the extent that you like to do summer and fall recreation, you'll have a few more weeks to do it in Montana, assuming you don't like to do winter recreation, because that's what you're going to lose as a consequence. And then there's the really scary stuff. And this has to do with those biophysical tipping points that drive these positive feedback loops that are so evident in the paleoclimate record. And there's at least 4 categories of these I want to talk about tonight. There's more. The first of these is ocean acidification. As we've been pumping all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the oceans have been absorbing a lot of it. And we've actually acidified the entire ocean over the last 100 years. The pH has dropped noticeably. And if it continues to drop far enough, the fear is that we could begin to dissolve the shells of the little creatures that live at the base of marine ecosystems, which would have devastating impacts on food chains all the way up. Second possibility is that if the Amazon and other large forests of the earth dry out and warm up too much, they could burn down. Amazon would flip to a savanna environment. That would release billions of tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and drive another couple degrees of warming on top of the warming that we're already expecting. Similar effect with methane in the tundra. Methane is a very powerful global warming pollutant. If we begin to see significant methane releases from melting tundra, that too would drive a couple more degrees of warming on top of the warming that we're already experiencing and set off a kind of runaway greenhouse effect that would drive planetary temperatures higher and higher. And then finally, the one that really has the scientific community concerned right now, because the data has been coming in fast and furious and it's not looking particularly good. And that is the possibility that we might, perhaps very soon, cross some emissions threshold that would lock in a temperature increase that would lead to the irreversible collapse of the West Antarctic and Greenland ice sheets. Now, if that was to happen, it would raise global sea levels by 35 to 40 feet. It would flood every major coastal city in the world. It would lead to hundreds of millions of environmental refugees. It wouldn't happen overnight. It would take somewhere from a couple hundred to 1,000 years for that process to be completed. But once set in motion, there would be no going back. It would be an irreversible result. Now, all of this data led Dr. James Hansen, who is the top US government climate scientist, he's the head of the NASA Goddard Space Research Institute, to say this 2 years ago now. Well, over 2 years ago now. And it was actually reading this statement by Dr. Hansen that got me thinking and actually made me realize how urgent this situation is, and it really framed the need for Focus the Nation. This is what he said. How far can it go? The last time the world was 3 degrees warmer than it is today, that's 6 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 3 degrees C, 6 degrees F, which is what we expect later this century. That's a business as usual forecast. Sea levels were 25 meters higher, 75 feet higher. That's what we know from the paleo record. If you go back, the last time the world was that hot, we know sea levels were that high. So that's what we can look forward to if we don't act soon. How long have we got? We have to stabilize emissions of carbon dioxide within a decade. That's 8 years now. Or temperature will warm by more than 1 degree, that's 2 degrees F, and they're going to warm by more than that with all likelihood. That'll be warmer than it's been for 500,000 years, and many things could become unstoppable. We don't have much time left. That's the top US government climate scientist speaking in language as plainly as he can about how urgent the need is for significant action. When I read that 2 years ago, I said, you know, Americans don't know this. I mean, they really don't. I mean, they get that global warming is real and bad increasingly, but they do not understand the magnitude of the decisions that we're either going to make or not make in the next couple of years that are going to go so profoundly affect the future of all life on the planet. So, as a result, we owe you guys, our young people, a focused discussion about these decisions. That conversation had to happen. And as if we didn't need this added sense of urgency, just last year, Dr. Hansen said this. He said, I believe that a business as usual scenario will guarantee future disintegration of the West Antarctic and parts of Greenland. Dr. Poshari, who is the head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, said last fall, he said, if we wait until 2012 to act, it will be too late. What we do in the next 2 or 3 years will determine our future. This is the defining moment. So I said at the beginning of my talk, we are standing at a truly unique moment in human history in the sense that the decisions we're going to make are so profound No generation before us has had the kind of opportunity or challenge that we are facing now. Okay, so how do we get out of this mess? Right? Can we get out of this mess? And this is the good news part of the talk. This is the happy part of the talk. Okay? Now, remember, the problem here is the thickness of that carbon blanket. It started out 280 parts per million pre-industrial. It's now 385 parts per million. And if we work really hard, we can probably hold it to 450 parts per million. And if we do that, and then over time reduce the levels in the atmosphere, then we can probably forestall those catastrophic consequences and leave you guys with a world that will be different and challenging in many ways, but will still be recognizable. It will still be essentially the same biosphere that you guys will be inhabiting. Now, to do that, the rich countries of the world would have to meet the Kyoto targets, one scenario, and by the end of the century cut emissions on the order of 90%. Developing countries get to keep on polluting till about 2050, but they too have to make steep cuts, then getting about half to where they were right now in 2000. Okay? Now, this was supposed to be the happy part of the talk, good news part of the talk, right? Kind of look at that picture and go, don't see it. But challenge you to think, what was the major emission source from the transportation sector 100 years ago? Transportation. Horse poop. Okay? Definitely managed to reduce emissions of horse poop by well over 90% over the last 100 years. Okay? So that's all we got to do. We went from horses to cars. Got to go from cars to something else. And that something else is no mystery. Everybody kind of gets it. We need to produce electricity from clean energy sources, wind, solar, geothermal, biofuels. And once we have that clean energy, then we can use it to run our vehicles directly on batteries, or make hydrogen and burn the hydrogen in our cars, or run it through fuel cells, or run our vehicles directly on sustainable biofuels. So there's a very rich menu of technological opportunities that would allow us to unhook from this addiction to fossil fuels and make this rapid transition to a clean energy economy. The problem, of course, is that with the exception of wind power and efficiency, which is the cheapest form of electricity out there, those technologies are currently too expensive. So where are we now? Well, collectively, the European countries are on track to meet that Kyoto target. Some will be above, some will be below, but as a whole, they're going to meet the target. Canadians, Japanese, Australians have signed on to Kyoto. They're making serious efforts, not going to meet the targets. And of course, here in the United States, we pulled out of Kyoto in 2001. We've done nothing at the federal level, and we're now about 20% above 1990 levels. Pulled out of Kyoto in 2001, two arguments. One, we couldn't afford it, it would wreck the economy. And two, it wasn't fair that developing countries did not face any limits under the Kyoto Accord. Right? What about affordability? Well, economists who studied what Kyoto would have cost fell into two camps. And on the one hand, there were economists who said, well, you know, it really won't cost us anything. It'll be free. And the reason is that as a nation, we are so wasteful with our energy use. On a per capita basis, we consume twice as much as the Japanese and the Germans. That using known technologies, we could have cut our energy use, cut our emissions, and wound up actually saving money. Concrete example, the National Academy of Sciences has told us that we could boost the fuel efficiency of our vehicle fleet by about 30%, cut emissions by 30%, and save money because the higher upfront costs of the cars would be more than offset over their lifetime by the fuel savings. And of course, we'd wind up shipping tens of billions of fewer dollars to unfriendly countries in the Middle East, which would be, you know, a good energy security reasons to do this kind of thing as well. Other economists said, well, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Kyoto would have cost us something. And at the high end, that something worked out to be about $300 per family per year, mostly in the form of higher energy prices. And now that's real money. But between 2002 and 2006, the US government spent more money on the war in Iraq than Kyoto would have cost over its entire multi-decadal lifetime. Now, Iraq has been very expensive for America on a lot of dimensions, most importantly loss of life. But from an economic point of view, the economy did not even shrug. For the last 6 years until the last year, growth has been good, unemployment rates have been low, stock market's been high. So the question is, could we have afforded Kyoto? Absolutely. It either would have been free or cost us something that we've shown we can already shoulder if we put our minds to it as a nation. Is stabilization this decade affordable? Absolutely. We can, it'll either be free or cost us something we know we can afford. What about poor countries? Well, clearly they have to be part of the solution because China may already have passed us as the biggest emitter. Certainly in the next decade, the developing countries will become the largest emission source. But from a moral perspective, if you ask who's responsible for the global warming that's in the pipeline right now, global warming is a very long-lived pollutant. It lasts in the atmosphere well over 100 years. So for the next few decades, it's going to be the rich countries, Japan, US, Europe, who are really responsible for the warming that we're observing. But from a more practical point of view, Kyoto was specifically designed with this mechanism where rich countries go first because we have the markets and the wealth and the technology and the engineers and the research universities to invest in these clean energy technologies, drive down their costs, so that by the time India and China and Brazil and South Africa are shopping for the power plant technologies that they're going to need to still bring a couple billion people out of poverty over the next few decades, they're going to be installing wind farms and solar arrays, not only because they have to, because the planet's heating up so fast, but more fundamentally because they're the cheapest thing out there. And the model here would be cell phones, right? So if you go to a developing country like Ecuador, people are not stringing copper wires all over the country. They're going straight to cell technology. And on a vastly wider scale, this is going to be the mission of your generation. You guys are going to have to rewire the entire planet with clean energy technologies and bring an end to the fossil fuel era. And this is the second reason that the next few years are such a critical time. Because technologies do not mature overnight. They take 20 years to mature. And in the year 2030 or 2025, when you guys are 35 and 40 years old and you're running the show, you're going to really need us right now to have invested tens of billions of dollars a year in sustainable biofuels and fuel cells, solar arrays, so that you will have those technologies at your fingertips, allowing you to do what you need to do for your children. We have a model for this, and I like to think of it in terms exactly of intergenerational gift giving. So the year is 1980, I'm in college. My father's generation, Jimmy Carter as president, concerned about dependence on Middle East oil, energy security. At that time, the US government invested a fair amount of money in clean energy technology research, a few $100 million a year. Now, in 1980, there was no such thing as commercial wind power. It didn't exist. If you wanted to build a windmill to produce electricity, it would cost you about 25 cents a kilowatt hour. But this government investment in these clean energy technologies, California doubled the ante. They set up their own subsidies to match the federal subsidies. So you could have built a wind turbine in Southern California in 1982 that didn't even work and still get your money back from the tax credits. So this was not very smart policy, right? Just threw money at the problem, but it was effective policy. And by the mid-1990s, California was the world leader in installed wind power capacity. Prices had come down to about 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, globally, we're well over 80,000 megawatts installed worldwide. And if you've got access to a good transmission and a good site, wind power is now the cheapest electricity generating source in the world, and it's the fastest growing electricity generating source in the world. So we've done this. My parents' generation gave us this incredible gift that taught us some lessons. And the first lesson is that we can do this, right? That for modest investment sums today, we can deliver technologies in 20 years that can have a profound impact in you guys carrying out your mission as the greatest generation. We learned also the costs of sort of not engaging in this clean energy future. When the subsidies dried up in the United States in the mid-1990s, the wind industry moved abroad. And now Germany and Denmark are the world leaders. And when we go shopping for wind turbines in Oregon, we don't buy them from a California company. We buy them from a Danish company called Vestas. We learned this same lesson just over the last couple of years as the Ford Motor Company has announced that they're going to cede the number 2 automaker slot in the United States to Toyota, laying off 30,000 workers. In the early 1990s, the Japanese understood how global warming was going to reshape world energy markets. They invested heavily in hybrid technologies. Now they own those technologies and the jobs that come with them. And the last thing we learned is that it does take 20 years. These technologies do not mature overnight. And like the jet plane, like the silicon chip, like the internet, significant government support for those technologies is critical. So let me go back and show you. This is why you guys are the greatest generation. All right, look what has to happen. My generation has to do 2 things, both of which are not economic problems or technical problems. We need to turn this corner. We need to stabilize emissions and begin to cut. That's thing 1. It's imminently affordable. Thing 2 is that we have to start investing maybe $30 to $40 billion a year in clean energy technologies. That sounds like a lot of money. It's 2 months of the Iraq War. It's the kind of thing that we could do easily if we put our minds to it. Those 2 things have to happen this decade. But look what you guys have to do. Between the year 2020 and 2050, you guys have to cut emissions in the United States and globally in the rich countries on the order of 80%. 80%. And what that means is that by the year 2050, there can be no coal plants operating on this planet that do not sequester their carbon. There can be no or very few old vehicles that still burn gasoline. You guys really have to reinvent the planet in the next 30 years. And in order to do that, you have to push us now to act on your behalf. Because just like my parents' generation earned their label as the greatest generation on the beaches of Normandy at age 20, you guys are at age 20 right now. You have to do the same thing, but it's going to be in the state capitals, the Helenas, and in Washington, D.C. Because only you all have got the moral authority to speak for the future. Only you guys can break global warming out of this partisan frame and look congresspeople and senators in the eye and say, this is not about left and right. This is about our future and our children's future, and you need to do this for us. And if you guys do not step up right now, and take that initiative, it's going to be very difficult to get the attention of lawmakers to take these 2 relatively simple steps that nevertheless have to be taken. So if we do that collectively, and we can over the next few years, then you guys get to fulfill this historical mission. You get to save the planet. Well, where do we stand? Okay. Science says global warming is very real with very serious consequences for billions of people and up to half of the creatures on the planet. Public opinion by a large majority now is saying we should do something about global warming. Economic analysts say we can do what we need to do: stabilize emissions, invest in clean technologies at relatively low cost. Business opinion, IBM, Nike, Johnson & Johnson, British Petroleum, Shell, all these companies saying we need to cap global warming pollution now so that companies who want to do the right thing can do the right thing. It's as if the only people who don't get how serious the global warming crisis is happen to live and work inside the Beltway of Washington, D.C. And as a parent, as a citizen, as an educator, this makes me mad. It makes me angry because it's as if we learn nothing from decade after decade of smaller environmental crises. From thalidomide babies to burning rivers, killer smogs, love canals, ozone holes, only now we are taking our stupidity from the local to the global. We are literally playing an incredibly dangerous game of dice with our kids' climate control system, and all we are hearing from our leaders in Washington is, no, we can't stop this, it will cost too much. How did we get here? How did America go from being an environmental leader to being a backslider, someone who's actually sabotaging global efforts to solve this problem? And you actually know the answer to this question. You learned it in high school civics. The American system of government with its checks and balances is designed for gridlock. is designed to allow an organized minority to hold the system hostage and block progress. You also know how, as Americans, we solve this problem, right? Every 30 or 40 years when the system breaks down, Washington breaks down, Americans rise up, they drop their everyday business, they get engaged, they form social movements from abolition, women's suffrage, labor rights, civil rights, and they sweep through Washington and they set the country on a new direction. And they establish 30 or 40 more years of prosperity. And that's what's happening right now. Over the next year, a powerful bipartisan clean energy movement will sweep across this country and change the future. Change your future. Or it won't. And that decision rests really in our hands. I'm going to not talk much about Focus Nation. You guys saw the video. We managed to mobilize about 1 million people this year. Please sign up for the sign-up sheet that's going around. Stay in touch with us. This is our website, focusthenation.org. Please check it out. Maybe I'll put it up in the Q&A. And just recognize that that was just a start. We got great media coverage, Time, New York Times, Business Week, Forbes. Next year, February 2009, we're going to be 5 times as big. We're going from 2,000 to 10,000 participating institutions. But most importantly, we're going from 75 of the nation's top political leaders, many of whom you saw in the film, to half of the nation's top political leaders. We are committed to engaging half of the members of Congress, half of the U.S. Senate, half of the governors in a direct dialogue between campuses and Congress. And the idea is on February 4th, 2009, in this auditorium, you will be conversing in Washington, D.C. You don't let Max Baucus get away with sending you a video this time. You want him actually on a video screen in D.C. having a real-time conversation with you about this. All right? And you get your Republican congressman to do the same thing, because this has got to be a bipartisan initiative. You've got to break through that, and you've got to let him know that this is not about Democrats and Republicans, it's about your future. So stay in touch with us, help us. We can't do this without you, because we need not just the University of Montana, but we need all the high schools in this region, we need all the churches in this region, we need the community colleges, and it really has to come from you. Because, you know, I hope you don't leave this semester, which sounds like an incredible semester, and Casey Golden next week will be a wonderful capstone, and say, this is kind of a cool class, kind of a cool lecture. You know, it really is hard to imagine that we are truly living at a sort of in this window, this very narrow window where our actions are going to have such a profound impact on the future. And so what I will ask you to do tonight is to go back to our website, focusthenation.org, check it out, spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, learn about the program, and then send 5 emails to people who are not on this campus after you've signed up to get on the listserv, and say, you know, I did go to a cool lecture, I have been part of a cool class, and, you know, check out focusthenation.org. You know, whether it's your Boy Scout troop leader or your high school science teacher or somebody you know at another school, say, we're doing this in a big way at the University of Montana next year, and you need to be involved. Because I've been talking about global warming for a long time, and at the end of my speeches, I never really knew what to tell people to do. You know, change your light bulbs. Just, you know, it just doesn't add up, but this adds up. This is the kind of thing that's going to be big enough at a very critical moment in American history, in planetary history. It'll be the first 100 days of the new Congress. And if we mobilize the voice of 5,000 youth, 5,000 young people to look our members of Congress in the face, we can put this on the agenda. This can become a signature of the next Congress, and they can do for you what needs to happen. So, you know, I do talk about global warming and mass extinction all the time, and people say, isn't that depressing? Doesn't that make you hopeless? And I do think there are 2 futures out there. These are my kids. This is Emma and Liza. Emma is a 20-year-old now. So my point here is that, you know, 20 years goes by very, very fast. And it ain't going to be long till your kids are in college and you're looking back on the year 2008 and you're saying, I am so glad, that I got engaged and I let my GPA slip a little bit so I could go to Washington, D.C. and talk to my Congress people and get my fellow students engaged, all right? I'm serious. I'm serious as a heart attack here. That's what you're going to be grateful for when you look back and you've got kids that were this little and grew up to be that big. Because there really are two futures, and I'm not sure which one's going to come true, really. One's pretty dystopic. Year 2100, it could be 10.5 degrees hotter than it is right now. It's a post-peak oil, post-water shortage world, mass extinctions, tribalistic politics, not the kind of place that you want for your children. But there is a second future out there, and that's one I think we're all very much alive to, which is over the next couple of years, we do the right thing, and we make those investments, and we cut those emissions, and you guys are able to fulfill that task of rewiring the entire planet with clean energy technologies over your lifetimes. And I'm not pessimistic about that. I'm not optimistic about that. None of us can know what the world's going to be like in 50 or 100 years. But I did just write this book, Fighting for Love in the Century of Extinction, How Passion and Politics Can Stop Global Warming. And I really do believe that. I do believe that. I believe that you all have got the grace and the intelligence and can develop the wisdom to become the greatest generation. Thank you. Let's have some conversation. Yeah.
You were saying that you get to the end of your lecture, you have a hard time telling people what.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you were talking to people about consumer patterns and consumption that goes beyond just use of oil. One of the reasons I'm thinking of this is I work at a building on campus, and I get the joyful job of changing garbages. And I can tell you that 90% of the students that come into that do not recycle. They make that choice on a daily basis. They take those containers full of corn syrup and they just toss them in the garbage. And that makes me feel good.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge array of ways that we can address this problem. Recycling is good because it reduces energy intensity of the economy. Food waste is bad for the same reasons. Eating local and eating low on the food chain are good for this. But we don't have much time. We have a very short period of time to turn that emissions curve and to make those social investments in these technologies. And I think that as people who've been concerned about the environment for too many years, we focused our attention on preaching about lifestyle change and ignoring politics. Because the reality is that only the power of the US government over the next few years is going to be the agent in which we can collectively make these changes. Once we get that done, then we can begin to move on and sort of think about sort of the whole array of social and local political action and combinations that are going to be needed to really address this challenge. And I think about this, I use civil rights analogies a lot. I think where we are right now with global warming is, it's kind of like 1960. In 1960, Americans understood that Jim Crow laws and segregation was bad and immoral and wrong. But they felt that somehow they were fatalistic about it. They thought that somehow that was just the way things always had been and always would be. By 1964, the civil rights movement had swept across America, ignited America's sense of justice. And what we did in 1964 was we passed laws, right, that said, thou shalt not discriminate. And we eliminated legal segregation. And the impact of those laws over the next 40 years was, combined with people's hard work, was a profound cultural change where we're now at the point where we may very well elect a black man as next president of the United States. And Martin Luther King was not out there sort of asking people to consider not being racists and realize what a profound change that would make in their life, right? The goal of the civil rights movement was legislation. And in the same way, we need to move America in a year beyond a fatalistic acceptance of global warming. It's real, but nothing we can do about it, to a determination to end it. Right? If we pass those laws, then over the next 40 years, you guys are going to have to sort of profoundly change our culture as well. And yeah, I'm going on and on. Let me stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a question that I asked Mr. Hansen. It's a couple things. Our stock market isn't up. The dollar's been devalued by over 50%.
Yep.
We're headed into a depression.
Yep.
That's what's going on. And there's people that really run the show. And part of the military-industrial complex speech was that there would be an intellectual and scientific elite that would bamboozle people. And I encourage everyone to check everything out and remember the great story of Y2K. And here's the question that I asked Mr. Hansen. Why are the ice caps on Mars melting and several other planets in our solar system show signs of heating up? Isn't it really the sun that is the driving force?
No, it's not.
The sun is not the driving force.
It's not the driving force of anthropogenic warming that we're seeing on this planet. Now, I'm sure Dr. Hansen had a good explanation for Mars and Venus or what. Okay. Solar variation has actually been going the wrong way to drive warming over the last 20 years. It's been declining a little bit in intensity. We're seeing rapid warming. So we can
suggest you check that out.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for you. The outdoors inconvenient truth, I'm sure you've seen that, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, basically, my question is that, there was two graph studies showed, the carbon dioxide trend and the temperature trend, but hundreds of other climate scientists have checked it out, and they're saying that the temperature preceded the carbon dioxide by over 800 years in some spots, so does that sort of contradict the...
No, it doesn't at all. Because you heard me talk about a positive feedback loop. So in the past, what drives ice age swings in temperature are orbital wiggles. So actually quite small forcings that begin to generate positive feedback loops in the system. And one of the most important positive feedback loops is CO2. So in the past, when you're at the bottom of an ice age cycle, you began to get some warming driven by solar variation, small amounts of it. And then you would see oceans beginning to absorb less CO2, more CO2 in the atmosphere, warmer planet, thicker blanket, warmer planet, thicker blanket, warmer planet. So it doesn't at all contradict that. It's very consistent with it. It's something that climate scientists understand very well. Yeah?
Given the importance you give to the political role in this change, and the mention you talked about with the checks and balances system, do you believe that there's a more fundamental change in the political system of America that's needed before these big changes can occur?
No, I really don't. I mean, if you look at what we're talking about here is another round of environmental legislation, right? Which we've had much of in the past 40 years. As well as a bit of a shift because we also need a technology policy. And we've done that through the Department of Defense. We've never really been explicit about doing it through the government in other ways. The Republican Party has a long and honorable tradition of environmental stewardship, going back to Teddy Roosevelt. Richard Nixon oversaw the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the first wave of environmental legislation. George Bush Sr. signed into law legislation that cut acid rain pollution in half. Okay? So we also know that over the last 20 years, the Republican Party has moved away from that tradition, embracing what I call government is the problem conservatism. Okay? Under that sort of ideological worldview, there's not much room for environmental regulation because people who have grown up believing that think that their role as public servants is to cut regulation and cut taxes, right? So global warming is a real problem for them, and as a consequence, they've been denying it in many, many ways. But that process has come to a halt, and there's sort of a big battle within the Republican Party right now. A third of the people who participated in Focus Nation were Republicans. John McCain has been a strong advocate of action for global warming. So what we need in the Republican Party is a resurgence of that traditional belief in environmental stewardship. You heard from one of the evangelical leaders in this movement. So there's been a strong resurgence among cultural conservatives and an interest in procreation stewardship. So So the Republican Party is rethinking its position and needs to regain its pragmatism. The Democratic Party needs to get over its spinelessness and get some backbone. And those two things are certainly possible. Will they happen? I don't know. But do they require, fundamental campaign reform and a new parliamentary system? And no, they don't. I mean, it's absolutely within the realm of possibility that we can get done in the next 2 years what we need to get done.
Isn't there an act right now they're trying to get passed that's a bipartisan act to help with some of the...
Yeah, the Warner-Lieberman Act is sort of the live cap and trade legislation in Congress. It has problems on a number of dimensions, but something like that is very likely to emerge in the next Congress. Now, the question for you young people here, and your job, is to make sure it's strong enough to do the job that you need it to do. Because it could easily be a sham piece of legislation. It's a question of whether it really has the kind of teeth it's going to need to do what needs to be done. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm not really familiar with all that Focus the Nation does, but from what it sounds like, they had an interaction on January 31st, 2008. We're going to have another one on 2009. Is one day going to be enough? I mean, what else can we do in the meantime? Because the other reforms took months and months of action.
Yeah, I mean, social movements have all kinds of dimensions. Focus the Nation is the teach-in part of the social movement that's pushing for global warming solutions. There's a whole array of other organizations, onesky.org. The Campus Climate Challenge organizes young people. Of course, Al Gore's got this new initiative, the Climate Alliance. There's cities and towns that are working to reduce their emissions locally. Pretty much anywhere you turn, and pretty much in any community, you can plug into this movement. Your churches and synagogues are engaged. So, I know Missoula is kind of like a lot going on here. So if you want to get involved, I bet there's somebody here who could, locally, who could steer you in that direction. Yeah.
One thing you mentioned that part of the solution would be biofuels and hydrogen.
Yep.
And it's my understanding that they emit CO2 as well. And biofuels are just as much CO2 as gasoline.
Yeah, we've gone down a sort of a dead end with biofuels in the sense that we're trying to produce them from food. And we've been doing that for about 30 years. And what we need to do is produce biofuels from non-food sources. So cellulosic ethanol. President Bush actually talked about switchgrass in the State of the Union a couple years ago, which is a potential feedstock. Now, in general, these technologies, there's not going to be a magic bullet. And at this stage, we just need to be open-minded about all of them and really kind of run down the path and see where they're going to lead. I don't think any technologies ought to be ruled out at this point, although certain ones are going to be less likely than others. So we need to figure out how to do ethanol biofuels better. Hydrogen certainly has potential problems. It may be a solution. But we need to explore a whole array of options. Yeah?
This question is along the line of what I have. People talk about a difference in the carbon footprint or emissions of currently harvested kinds of biofuels and wood burning compared to carbon from coal or from prehistoric sources. Is there a difference? I mean, can you explain?
You mean in the molecular composition of the carbon?
No, a difference in the total output of carbon footprint. People talk about. Okay.
I mean, a carbon footprint is just how much. If you think about energy source, how much carbon is emitted for the final end use of the power, the heat, or the power that you're getting. And so that, for example, if you had a piece of property and you cut down a tree on your property and burned it in your wood stove, and that tree grew back, it would have a very small carbon footprint for the heat that's being produced. Okay? And if on the other hand you have to haul that wood from miles and miles away and burn a lot of gas to get it there so you can burn it, then that will increase the carbon footprint of the fuel. Does that help?
Well, I'm trying to get my mind around this idea that there's a difference in burning current biofuels. That would only be because current biofuels can, if you then have a second crop, it will suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere. So if you burn a tree and regrow a tree, then it's a zero if you don't consider the energy that was used to harvest the tree and get it to the place that it's burned. Okay? Yeah?
I don't know a lot about Focus the Nation, but it seems like what you guys have done is, gotten all these young people together to talk about global warming. Does it offer some sort of like blueprint or something? Like you're going to have these meetings like every year to say, on your campus, replace all your light bulbs or get recycling going.
Yeah.
Every campus in the country commit to doing this.
Yeah.
Do you guys do anything like that?
We actually don't. We work with an organization called the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, otherwise known as ASHE. And Jessie here can tell you about it. She's the sustainability coordinator on campus. And they really are the people who have a blueprint for how to green your campus. And so it's a good organization with lots of good resources for that. Focus the Nation is really just trying to create a national conversation among faculty, staff, students, citizens about global warming solutions at a national level. We don't really focus that much on what you can do at your house or campus. Yeah?
I just wanted to mention that some people are looking for more local things to do, and I know that on Earth Day, the local sustainability group MUD is sponsoring the Earth Day celebration at Caris Park, and there will be a number of tables of different groups that have an interest and are doing working on global warming, and that might be an opportunity to go around and see where you might want to go.
Yeah, for those of you who are committed, I know there's a guy, a wonderful organizer here, I believe in Missoula, Dave Merrill, who's right here, who might want to mention that he has a wonderful opportunity. Yeah.
We meet twice a month, and we're much more focused on policy and politics. We're doing coal train vehicles now down by the railroad tracks. It's something that we've done into, and we're always looking for ways to generate more pressure, especially in the federal level. We've been having meetings with Senator Tester, Senator Walker, and Congressman Greenberg. So let's plug into that. The more bodies we have, the more problems.
And I saw you were running a camp this summer for those who are interested in...
Yeah, we also have an action camp where you can get training in nonviolent direct action, some of the top training in the country. And that's going to be held outside of Helena on June 1st and 6th. There's no charge, great food. You only have to pay for your transit, so if you're in Montana, that's not a big deal. So your website. Like to get involved and talk to me after. And the website is globalwarmingsolution.org. And solution is in the top right. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you said that the first step was around that corner for your generation was to pass a new round of environmental legislation.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how the movement in general, this is something I constantly glossed over. I'm interested to get your impression on how the movement in general is going to compete with the friendly neighborhood Exxon lobbyists down to, Exxon is one of the, if not one of the most profitable companies in the world, and they stand to lose a whole lot of money in this next step.
Yeah, that's a good question. It shows the difficulty, but also the ease actually of getting this job done. The Exxon president was actually in front of Congressman Markey, who was in our presentation here, his committee last week, and got grilled. And Exxon is getting $18 billion, or the oil industry is getting $18 billion in tax credits. That's about half of the money that you need to invest in those clean energy technologies to allow you guys to save the planet. Right? Gives you a sense of what's possible. And, sure, it's going to be hard. But come on. I mean, abolition was hard. Women's suffrage was hard. You know, labor rights was, civil rights was hard. This is easy, right? We got the public on our side. We got majority of businesses. We got huge big businesses on our side. You know, it's a bipartisan movement. I mean, really, the only people who are opposed, really, in an economic sense, are a few oil companies. You even got oil companies on your side, BP and Shell. Are a couple of oil companies and a couple of coal companies, and United Auto Workers. All right, so you know you got a bit of a problem, but it's really, compared to the problems or the challenges that Americans have solved in past political battles, this one's easy. How? Just get involved. You know, just get engaged. You know, spend, you know, people ask me, what's the most important thing I could do to stop global warming? What's the most important thing that I could do? Well, it's to go to your League of Conservation Voters, find out who is a clean energy candidate in a swing district. In Montana, it doesn't even have to be in Montana because you can work for somebody by phone or internet these days, and volunteer to work for them for 10 or 20 hours a week this election cycle. And let's elect into Congress you know, people who get it, who believe in it. We can do that. I mean, because there are a lot of good people running who do get it. And it'll also push the people who are in power to begin to embrace this agenda. The model that I use actually is the progressive era, 100 years ago. And you think that we face a corrupt government and the power of big business. I mean, you know, back then they would hire Pinkerton guards to go kill people that they didn't like. They don't do that too much anymore. And, you know, corrupt government, please. I mean, talk about corrupt government. That was the era of the boss-dominated politics. But the progressives had a vision. They had a vision of cleaning up government and regulating corporations, and it was a bipartisan movement. Wilson, the Democrat, Roosevelt, the Republican, drove through those reforms. And what the progressives did was they said, we're not Republicans or Democrats, we're progressives. We have this vision of reform. And that's what clean energy politics is about. It's a vision of reform that really can attract bipartisan support and is already doing it. It's a very powerful, it's a very positive vision about a new kind of economy. So this is actually an easy fight compared to what Americans have done in the past. We just have to get off our butts. Yeah?
The fact that there are so many people in this room, obviously indicates the concern for this issue is growing. I'm sure if you were here 2 years ago, you'd probably be speaking to 25 students in a tribal studies class. And I feel like most of these sort of meetings and lectures are informative. Each one starts off with like a 30 or 45 minute sort of overview of the issue, and then the lecturer tells us how we can get out involved once we leave the lecture. And quite a few of these lectures I've left feeling really inspired, really pumped up. And then 2 days later, it kind of dwindles and nothing really happens.
Yeah.
Because there isn't this sort of large, you know, group-based action medium yet established. I'm wondering when it's going to transition to action-oriented rather than informative. When you said you have to do something now, I half expected someone to get up and like, lead a charge out to go.
Well, good. All right. What you should do is, all right, talk to David right after class, or after class, and he can really plug you into a community that's very engaged. And I think what's maybe missing at Montana is a group of students who are meeting regularly and have are drinking beer and talking this stuff over. And I mean, you're probably drinking beer, but but you're not focused on solving this problem while you're drinking beer. So maybe you have that already, but and there are great resources to help you. So we have organizers at Focus the Nation. You can call them up and say, you know, how do we really get this started? How do we get a Focus the Nation effort going on our campus? They'll give you support. The Campus Climate Challenge also has got good organizers who have got good ideas. So if you're somebody that, you know, says what we're going to do, let's do it, you know?
There are enough smart people in this room right now to think of something that this entire group could do right now. I mean, a few lectures ago, someone left in their email to some congressman, and we all talked about it, and I'm sure maybe like 20% of the people in this lecture wrote a letter. we could all write a letter right after this lecture and get it together and then send it together. We're all here right now. Let's do it.
Excellent idea. You want to? Okay.
Thank you. I just want to say I really appreciate your comments, and if anybody does want to get together after the lecture, please do so. What's your name?
Alex.
Alex. Thanks, Alex. Also, midway through the lecture series, we had a meeting for those folks who wanted to focus specifically on solutions. Why don't we do that again after our last lecture? I know it's a very difficult time of the semester for you. The semester's wrapping up with finals, but why don't we just say that April 21st, the week after Casey's here, which is 2 weeks from today, we'll have an additional class. It'll be optional. But those folks who are really interested in talking more about how to organize yourselves as students, we can provide at least a setting for you to have that conversation. Sound good?
So I would say, before I hang up, why don't you come down here, everybody who wants to write a letter tonight, why don't you organize it? Make it happen. It's a great idea. Okay. Do you want me to should I keep going? More questions? Okay, let's take one last question. Yeah.
I teach at the University in Illinois, and I was actually doing a Focus the Nation thing right before I came here. But what I noticed about my school, and I'm involved in sustainability sorts of issues, is that it's entirely faculty and staff driven. Mm-hmm. And all of that is us, and there are very few students involved or interested. And so I think your major point tonight is you're 20, you got the energy, you need to do something. And I guess I wonder, but my experience at my school is radically different.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder what your impression of the United States is. Are the 20-year-olds, are they the movement, or is it all of us senior citizens saying, come on, you guys, do something?
You know,
what's your feeling?
It's a mixture of both. And here, before I do that, let me just say, here's what I think you should do, and this is a bigger issue. Next February, after Focus the Nation, we were talking about this tonight, you guys should get a bus and drive from here to Washington, D.C. for the Power Shift event. They're trying to get 12,000 young people there to lobby in Washington, like right in the middle of the first 100 days. It's going to be critical. And that's Focus the Nation plus Power Shift equals lots and lots of engagement of Congress people with young people about this clean energy future. Are you going to comment on that bus issue?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was one of two attendants of the Power Shift on campus last year, and Mark and I were just talking, and I think it would be really great to organize more students to go to that next year.
Absolutely. So what your job is to find out, rent a bus, and it'll take you about 36 hours to get there.
And anyway, so if anyone would like to talk to me afterwards about that event, being involved with that or trying to start something. It was kind of last minute this year, so it was hard. We didn't even know that we were going a week before we went. But we showed up and expected to see a lot of campus students there and realized that we were the only two.
Right. So you got to change that. So why don't we just say that you also come down here so people can meet with you afterwards, okay? So, you know, what's going on? I think, you know, when I was in college, I went to bed at night worrying about all-out nuclear war, you know? And that I just sort of really was worried that some idiot was going to hit the wrong button and I would wake up the next morning or I wouldn't, and every major city on the planet had been destroyed 7 times over and it was a dying world, okay? Now, if you told me that was 1982, if you told me 10 years later that I wouldn't have to worry about that, I would have said, you're crazy. This is an insoluble problem. How will this go away? And it went away. So, I think that you guys can take hope in that this seems gloomy and doomy, you bet. And I think, but there may be ways out of this that you guys are going to figure out. And I'm sure there will be many ways out of this that you guys will figure out. But for us, this was a yes or no thing. It was either going to happen or it wasn't. For a lot of the 20-year-olds that I talk to who are aware and thinking about their future, this is your reality, right? I don't know how you guys are dealing with this psychologically. Does it keep you up at night? I don't know. Maybe you just ignore it. But I think there's sort of 2 responses. One is kind of just denial, and the other is to really embrace it as your life and your challenge. And what I find is that an increasing number of young people are doing that. And the youth leaders of this movement are incredible. I mean, they're the most wired, they're the most savvy. This is not a protest movement, it's a solutions movement. You know, and that requires an incredible level of maturity among the young leaders. And you see that. I mean, the people who run Focus the Nation, really, right now are, you know, 23 and 24 and 24. You know, and I'm trying to sort of, you know, segue into doing less and less because I have to teach next year. So, you know, and it's Power Shift. I talked to 6,000 young people, and it was amazing. That energy is there. So, you know, you guys are all here. You're not organized. You don't have it together. But people are engaged and increasingly involved. So, you know, it will be you guys that save the planet. We need you right now, though, and that's the thing. You have to step up right now to do it.
Let's
Okay.
thank